Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Marcus Freeman, Notre Dame, rolling into 2025. I feel like a lot of the national media narrative around this program is how do they replace some of the talent they lost? Whether it's at the quarterback position with Riley Leonard, whether it's in the back end of the defense with a guy like Xavier Watts. Feel like not enough people are talking about why this football team can be even better in 2025. Now, I would even start before we even get into the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. I would start with this the winning culture that Marcus Freeman has established within this program. Look, 12 months ago, when you talked Notre Dame football, it was you're not necessarily giving that program the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the big games. Marcus Freeman showed us multiple different times in the 2024 year. Look, this is a new Notre Dame football team, a new Notre Dame football program where when the moment's the biggest, this program always seemed to play their best football in the 2024 year. That's probably where I would start. But then you start getting into the roster that they have and say, look, there's a lot of parts of this football team that you could see taking a step in 2025. And even though they got to replace some really, really good football players, there are answers on this roster, and there are parts of this roster where you can really clearly see Notre Dame having the opportunity to get better as a football team. Want to dive into some of those reasons, fired up to get into it before we do. And as always, to the Notre Dame fans, appreciate you guys. It's been a really busy offseason, especially for this program on the recruiting trail. I've had a blast, breaking down the commitments, talking about the visit weekends, but I'm even more excited, to get into fall camp, to get into the 2025 year. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. Without further ado, let's get into it. And I want to start with, one of the things that I think I've said this historically. Notre Dame fans and we've gotten into some battles in the comment section. And look, that's something I love about doing this is like hearing y'all opinions. And look, I'm gonna talk for 15 minutes. You might not agree with me on every single point I have. One of the things that the Notre Dame fans and I've been butting heads about over the last couple of years is I never really thought the pass catcher room was all that special over the last couple of years. In fact, I always felt like it was a position group that held Notre Dame back. And 2025, I'm not saying that. In fact, I'm saying, hey, this is something that I think could be really dynamic for Notre Dame in the 2025 year. This is the best pass catcher room that Notre Dame has had in a very long time. And although we don't know much about CJ Carr, I think we feel very comfortable having the idea that he can offer more from a throwing standpoint than Riley Leonard could in 2024. I mean, you go back to Notre Dame in the 2024 year, look, the offense was really damn good. And at 36 points per game, that was fifth best in the country. The passing attack, especially pushing the ball vertically down the field, that was relatively absent to this Notre Dame offense. In some of the bigger moments in the bigger games, you saw that lack of the downfield passing attack at times getting Notre Dame into some trouble. I mean, you look at it and say, hey, 7.1 yards per pass attempt, that was 74th in the country. Riley Leonard's average depth to target was 7.5 yards down the field, very low number. Only 10% of Riley Leonard's throws traveled 20 plus yards down the field. They didn't really have access to the deeper third in that passing attack. And I think it had to do with two things. One, that was not really Riley Leonard's game. I think Coach Denbrock did a really good job building an offense that leaned into Riley Leonard's skill sets, but there were certain parts you probably didn't want to ask Riley Leonard to do, and I think the deep ball was certainly one of them. But I think at the same time, I think the pass catchers were probably not elite. I don't think many Notre Dame fans would have said, hey, we had elite pass catchers in 2024. Well, I look at it going into 2025 and say pretty dang close to saying that about Notre Dame. You make some transfer portal additions, both of which that I really like. Malachi feels that big-bodied X wide receiver certainly can give you some verticality. I think Will Pauling's going to be a little bit more of that slot wide receiver, 7'11", always open kind of guy. Then you look at Micah Gilbert. You look at Cam Williams going into year 2. Jaden Greathouse going into year 3. I expect him to be potentially one of the better pass catchers in the country in 2025. You have a quarterback that I think brings you more ability throwing the football And at the same time, I think you have a pass catcher room that I think gives you more juice working vertically down the field. Now, that's not me getting up here and saying Notre Dame's going to get up there and just throw the football all around the yard. They are still going to go to their bread and butter, which is running the football with the best back in the country. I would argue that having a little bit more access to the deeper third in the passing attack, when teams play Notre Dame, you can't start just walking your safeties into the box recklessly. If you want to help your run game out, have a little bit more of a vertical passing attack. Force these opposing defenses to leave both their safeties high. Less bodies in the box for Jeremiah Love. That's only going to help the run game going into the 2025 year. I think that passing attack, both at the quarterback position and at the pass catcher position, better in 2025, I think should result in Notre Dame maybe being a better offense in 2025. Here's the other storyline that, look, maybe I'm going to get some pushback to some Notre Dame fans, but this is kind of my take after going back and watching some Notre Dame offense from last year. Look, this offensive line, I think, surpassed everybody's expectations in terms of what they were, especially with the injuries that they had to deal with. I mean, it was an incredibly impressive unit, especially in the run blocking department. Look, I would argue that when it came to pass protection, especially against some of the better front sevens and defensive lines that Notre Dame saw on their roster, I don't think it was great. I'm not saying it was bad, but I don't think it was great. I mean, you look at the numbers and say, hey, Riley Leonard, under pressure, 33% of his dropbacks. That's not great by any means. Why? How can I get up here and say Notre Dame's offensive line gets better going into 2025? I don't see any red names on this unit. I don't see any transfer portal additions. I guess what it comes down to is, look, there's a difference between a year 4 offensive lineman going into year 5 and a year 1 offensive lineman going into year 2, or a year 2 offensive lineman going into year 3. That's the entirety of this Notre Dame offensive line. It's just a bunch of young cats that are going into year 2, going into year 3. Look, it is fair to say that they get better going into year 2, better going into year 3. You see that pretty routinely across the board for a lot of offensive linemen, although they did not go into the portal and add any new names, just basic player development, which Notre Dame has done a very good job of over the last couple of years. I think it's safe to assume this offensive line gets better from where they were in 2024. They're more experienced playing together. A lot of these young cats have another year under their belt. There was a lot of baptism by fire for some of these young cats on the offensive line last year. That's only going to help them going into the 2025 year. And the other thing is, I mean, look at the guys that they lost in the portal. Rocco Spindler is going to be one of, if not the best offensive lineman for Nebraska. Pat Coogan, he's going to be starting for Indiana, college football playoff team. And Sam Pendleton's going to be starting for Tennessee. That was a college football playoff team. Like they lost some veteran offensive linemen who just couldn't find a path to playing time for Notre Dame in 2025. They didn't transfer away to the G5 ranks. Like they went to other programs that are some of the better programs across the country. That's all I got to know. That's all I need to know about where this offensive line can be in the 2025 year. So on the offensive side of the football, look, you return your guy in Jeremiah Love. Although there is some, let's say what it is, like uncertainty of what CJ Carr is going to be because we haven't really seen him. I think it's fair to say he adds more value in the passing attack to go along with better wide receivers and an offensive line that can be better in pass protection. That's the recipe for Notre Dame taking a step on the offensive side of the football. Now, transitioning to the Notre Dame defense, this is probably what I think frustrates me the most about how people are talking about Notre Dame. And this is not me getting up here and ignoring the fact that Notre Dame has to replace a lot of good football players. Ain't no question about it. I'm a Michigan fan. Many of y'all know that. I look at Michigan and Notre Dame in a very similar spot on defense rolling into 2025, where you kind of lose what I would say is the engine of the front seven. Both of Notre Dame and Michigan, like their engine last year was on the interior of the defensive line, right? Michigan, it was Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. For Notre Dame, it was Howard Cross and Riley Mills. Trying to replace those guys, there's probably not a replacement on the roster. But I think the conversation for both Notre Dame and Michigan, I promise that's the last time I bring up Michigan, is that the engine of the engine of the defense is just going to come from different positions. Last year, I wouldn't say Notre Dame's edge rushers were elite. A lot of the negative plays and a lot of the pass rush production came from guys on the inside of the defensive line, which is okay. But going into 2025, I look at, hey, what's the engine of this defense in 2025 going to be? I think it's Bryce Young going into year 2. I think it's Boubacar Traore coming back from the injury. I think it's a really deep edge rusher room with a lot of talent. I look at Boubacar and Bryce Young being like, hey, those are two guys that could go top 50 in the NFL draft over the next couple of years. Notre Dame didn't have horses like that in the 2024 year. I think they do in 2025. So although you have to replace some really good football players, I think some players at other positions step up and provide that pass rush value and disruption that Howard Cross and Riley Mills gave Notre Dame last year. Not to mention you have an off-ball linebacker unit that is one of the most dynamic linebacker units that you see across the country. Marcus Freeman going to get really creative in terms of how to use these linebackers, kind of dialing up some pass rush packages and using those guys to contribute as well in the front seven. You got to replace some good football players. Well, you got a lot of other good players who going into 2025. I think it's reasonable to expect a step from some of those cats. Last one, replacing the members of the secondary. This is easy. Look, and it's not me getting up here and saying Xavier Watts was not meaningful to Notre Dame. He was one of the most meaningful football players across the country. Are we just going to sit here and pretend like Marcus Freeman hasn't just pumped out defensive backs over the last couple of years? It's the same conversation you have with Georgia on the defensive line. Oh, they got to replace a couple first-round draft picks. Well, they seem to replace them successfully every single year. It's kind of what you're saying with Notre Dame at this point. I think you got the best cornerback duo in the country with Leonard Moore and Christian Gray. You return a guy like Adon Schuler, who I think is one of the better safeties in the country. Yes, you have to replace Xavier Watts. Notre Dame has shown us that the proof is in the pudding. There is evidence for us to point to that they replaced those guys at a very high level. The thing I appreciate most about Notre Dame, I'll say, is that I feel like they're one of the most complete teams across the country. And you look top to bottom of this depth chart and say, where are the glaring problems with this football team? Yeah, there might be a couple unknowns, headlined by CJ Carr, but you feel pretty confident about a lot of different position groups. The one position that I'm not sure about is the interior defensive line. Like, is Notre Dame good enough? I don't think it's going to be the strength of Notre Dame in 2025, which is okay, because I think you have other positions that can be your strength. What I'm looking for is, it can't be a liability, especially when you look at playing a team like Miami or Texas A&M early in the season. The two teams that have big, ugly offensive lines and want to run the football. If you want to get over the hump, win a national championship, you got to be solid on the inside and you got to be deep on the inside. Is Notre Dame there? I don't think it's going to be a glaring problem, but it's probably the thing I'm looking for the most to start the season for Notre Dame in 2025. If they put that together, you feel pretty good about not really having any vulnerabilities on this roster. We will pause it there. Notre Dame in 2025. Are they a better football team? I think you can make that argument. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.